Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 13, the foundation of the temple, of the origin of Freemasonry and Knights Templar by John R. Bennett. The foundation of the temple. It is difficult for the superficial reader to comprehend that although the Temple of Solomon is absolutely gone, effaced from the earth, so that not a crumb or a fragment can be recognized, yet its foundation remains. By this term, it is not meant the walls upon which the temple was built, comparing it with an ordinary edifice, but the platform, the hill, the mound artificially erected to serve as a basis for the sublime structure. The hill, styled in the Old Testament Moriah, and more recently Mount Moriah, was, by nature, a narrow, knobby, crooked ridge of the class familiarly known as hogback, deeply channeled by ravines and gullies, honeycombed with caves, and in no proper sense fit to be used as the basis of a great temple. On all sides it fell off rapidly and very steeply, except from northwest to southeast, the direction in which the ridge ran. The area on the summit was enlarged by the walls built along the declivities, the outside wall deep down the valleys, from 100 to 150 feet below the area on which the temple building stood. 100 feet again below this lay the original bedrock of the brook Kidron. The foundations of the temple, therefore, were 250 feet above the deep defiles around. This area, originally built by Solomon and enlarged by Herod, still exists, running on the south along the valley of Hinnom, 1,000 feet, and along the Kidron, 1,500, to transform this unsightly and circumscribed ridge into a solid, broad, high, and durable platform was a problem of stupendous magnitude, as great a one, perhaps even greater, than would have been that of making a platform entirely artificial. To illustrate and convey a practical idea of the task that devolved upon Hiram and his builders, go out upon a level plain, measure off an oblong square 1,600 feet by 1,000, equal to 36.5 acres. Build a wall round it of great stones 8, 10, 20, even 40 feet long, and of proportionate breadth and thickness. Bound the foundation stones of this wall firmly together with clamps of iron and lead, and in the same manner fasten them into the native rock that lies below. Rise that wall to an average height of 150 feet of solid mason work. Fill up solid the whole area of 36.5 acres to that great height of 150 feet. This being done, you will have such a platform as was erected by Solomon's craftsmen, upon which to build the temple. The figure is not absolutely correct, for there was a central core to the platform, viz., the original Mount Moriah, and in the mason work many large vaults and subterranean chambers were left. Now, when we describe the foundation of King Solomon's temple as still remaining, we allude to this stupendous base, the platform of 36.5 acres, constructed in so substantial a manner, nor the devastation of barbarian force, nor the mighty brood of earthquakes had the power to break it. So large are the stones of which the outer walls are built, so artistically are they laid together in relation to each other, and so formally mortised at their inner edges and at their points of conjunction with the native rock, that it is safe to say that no power that human hands can apply will ever remove them, nor will any volcanic force affect them, less than that which would elevate the bed of the sea and sink the mountains into the depths. On top of and along the outer walls of this enclosure or foundation were built the porticos or covered walks, above which were galleries or apartments, supported by pillars of white marble, that overlooked the brook Kidron and the valley of Hinnom. They were magnificent structures, resembling the nave and aisles of Gothic cathedrals. But these were only the outer buildings of the temple area. The porticos opened inwardly upon a court paved with marble and open to the sky. This was called the Court of the Gentiles, because the Gentiles were admitted to it, but were prohibited from passing further. It was the exterior court and by far the largest of all the courts belonging to the temple. It entirely surrounded the other courts and the temple itself. Passing through the court of the Gentiles, you enter the court of Israel, which was divided by a low stone wall into two divisions, the outer one being occupied by the women, from which an ascent is made of 15 steps to the inner one, which was occupied by the men. In this court and the piazza which surrounded it, the Israelites stood in solemn and reverent silence while their sacrifices were burned in the inner court, or court of the priest, and while the services of the sanctuary were performed. The court of the priest was within the court of Israel and was surrounded by it. Within this court stood the brazen altar on which the sacrifices were consumed, the molten sea in which the priest washed, and the 10 brazen lavers for washing the sacrifices, also the various utensils and instruments used for sacrificing. To this court the people brought their oblations and sacrifices, but none were permitted to enter but the priest who prepared and offered the sacrifice. From the court of the priest 12 steps ascended to the temple, strictly so called, which were divided into 3 parts: the porch, the sanctuary, and the Holy of Holies. At the entrance to the porch of the temple was a gate made entirely of brass, the most precious metal known to the ancients. Beside this gate, and just under the porch, there were the 2 pillars, Jachin and Boaz. These pillars were 27 feet high and 6 feet through. The thickness of the brass of each pillar was 3 inches. The one that stood on the right hand or south was called Jachin, and the other at the left hand or north was called Boaz. It has been supposed that Solomon, in erecting these pillars, had reference to the pillar of cloud and pillar of fire, which went before the Israelites in their journey through the wilderness, and that the right hand and south pillar represented the pillar of cloud, and the left hand or north pillar represented that of fire. Solomon did not simply erect them as ornaments to the temple, but as memorials of God's repeated promises of support to his people of Israel. For the pillar Jachin, derived from the Hebrew words Jah, Jehovah, and Achin, to establish, while the pillar Boaz, compounded of B, meaning in, and Oaz, meaning strength, signifies that in strength shall it be established. And thus were the Jews, in passing through the porch to the temple, daily reminded of the abundant promises of God, and inspired with confidence in his protection and gratitude for his many acts of kindness to his chosen people. If this symbolism be correct, the pillars of the porch, like those of the wilderness, would refer to the superintending and protecting power of deity. From the porch, you enter the sanctuary by a portico, which, instead of folding doors, was furnished with a magnificent veil of many colors, which mystically represented the universe. In the sanctuary were placed the various utensils necessary for the daily worship. The Holy of Holies, or innermost chamber, was separated from the sanctuary by doors of olive, richly sculpted and inlaid with gold and covered with veils of blue, purple, scarlet, and the finest linen. Into the most sacred place the high priest alone could enter, and that only once a year, on the Day of Atonement. If one looked upon Mount Moriah from the brow of Mount Olive opposite, and beheld the city from the direction of Bethany, it must have been a sight which, for architectural beauty and grandeur, perhaps has never been equaled, certainly not surpassed. It was an artificial mountain from the deep ravines below, wall, column, roof, pinnacle culminating in the temple within and above all, and probably measuring between 500 and 600 feet in height. James Ferguson Esquire, the distinguished architect, writes, "The triple temple of Jerusalem, the lower court standing on its magnificent terraces, the inner court raised on its platform in the center, and the temple itself raised out of the group and crowning the whole, must have formed, when combined with the beauty of the situation, one of the most splendid architectural combinations of the ancient world." Josephus wrote, "If anyone looked down from the top of the battlements, he would be giddy, while his sight could not reach to such an immense depth." This passed for foolish exaggeration till recent explorers vindicated the statement. Crowley, in Chialthia, in his magnificent word painting, describes the mountain and its glorious occupant, Temple of Herod, the year of its destruction, AD 70, which was similar in structure to the Temple of Solomon, as follows. "I see the court of the Gentiles circling the whole, a fortress of the purest marble, with its wall rising 600 feet from the valley, its kingly entrance, worthy of the fame of Solomon, its innumerable and stately buildings for the priests and officers of the temple, and above them, glittering like a succession of diadems, those alabaster porticos and colonnades in which the chiefs and sages of Jerusalem sat teaching the people, or walked, breathing the air and gazing on the grandeur of a landscape which swept the whole amphitheater of the mountains. I see, rising above this stupendous boundary, the court of the Jewish women, separated by its porphyry pillars and richly sculptured wall. Above this, the separated court of the men. Still higher, the court of the priest, and highest, the crowning splendor of all the central temple, the place of the sanctuary and of the Holy of Holies, covered with plates of gold, its roof planted with lofty spearheads of gold, the most precious marbles and metals everywhere flashing back the day, till Mount Moriah stood forth to the eye of the stranger approaching Jerusalem, what it had been so often described by its bards and people, a mountain of snow studded with jewels. All these buildings, porticos, columns, pinnacles, altar, and temple, having perished, not one stone remains upon another which has not been thrown down. The area alone remains, and the massive structures for 3,000 years have been sleeping in their courses. The preservation has been due to the ruin. Buildings so vast have been toppled down the slopes of Moriah that the original defiles and valleys have been almost obliterated. What has been regarded as the original surface has been found to be debris from 70 to 90 feet. With pickaxe and shovel, British explorers have been down to the original foundations. Fallen columns have been met with and avoided, or a way blasted through them. The cinders of burnt Jerusalem have been cut through and turned up to the light. Rich molds deposited by the treasures of Jewish pride. The seal of Haggai in ancient Hebrew characters was picked up out of the siftings of this deposit. The first courses of stones deposited by Phoenician builders have been reached. Lying on the living rock, quarry marks put on in vermilion have been copied, known to be quarry marks by the trickling down of paint, still visible, only they are above the letters, showing that when they were written the stones lay with the underside uppermost. The whole of Mount Moriah has been found to be fairly honeycombed, with cisterns and passages. One of these cisterns, known as the Great Sea, would contain 2 millions of gallons, and altogether not less than 10 millions. The wall of Ophel has been exposed, at the present time 70 feet high, though buried in debris, and the remains of towers and houses have been lighted upon belonging to the age of the kings of Judea. the 7 successive objects that have occupied this sacred ridge to which a Mason's attention is directed are: 1. The altar of Abraham. 2. The threshing floor of Ornan. 3. The altar of David. 4. The temple of Solomon. 5. The temple of Zerubbabel. 6. The temple of Herod. 7. The mosque of Omar. In the 14th century, this building was described as a very fair house, lofty and circular, covered with lead, well paved with white marble. The temple area is now occupied by 2 Turkish mosques, into which, until recently, neither Jew nor Christian was permitted to enter. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.